You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250. This is where we remember events that took place 250 years ago this week. It is a short bonus episode from the American Revolution podcast to remember these important 250th anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember South Carolina's attack on the Cherokee Nation, which began on July 29th, 1776. South Carolina patriots had already quashed the organization of a Tory army fighting with them at the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, and they'd also managed to fight off the British Army's efforts to capture Fort Sullivan in Charleston Harbor. But another threat loomed to the west. British agents and loyalists were encouraging the Cherokee Nation to rise up and attack South Carolina. For several decades prior, the colonists had pushed back the Cherokee, forcing them further inland. The Cherokee had tried to resist at times. The last major fighting took place in 1760, so by this time they were generally of the view that fighting would only result in another military defeat against a larger or more powerful army, and that would force them to cede even more territory. But with South Carolinians now at war with Britain, the Cherokee believed they could defeat the colonists. The colonists wouldn't have the backing of the British Army, and Britain would be fine with these attacks, even approving of them. In fact, British Indian agents were telling them to go for it, even promising them arms and ammunition. The British wanted the colonists to understand that not having the king's protection came with a very bloody price tag. In June, the Patriots had sent James McCall, leading a group of 33 men into Indian Territory. They were looking for Alexander Cameron, the British Indian agent. They met with the Cherokee, lying about the fact that their presence was to negotiate the return of some stolen property. On June 26, though, while McCall was meeting with a group of elders, Cherokee warriors burst in and captured him. They also killed several of his men, although most of his party was able to flee and return to friendlier territory. The Cherokee followed up this capture by launching a series of coordinated attacks all along the western borders of the southern colonies, which began on July 1st. The attacks fell on relatively isolated farms and villages, ruthlessly killing men, women, and children. They took some prisoners to return to camp as slaves, and the Cherokee tortured some of their prisoners to death, including children. This was clearly done in coordination with British agents. Warriors had been instructed to ignore farms that had Passover poles. These were poles that were marked with a white cloth wrapped around the top, and these were given to loyalist households along the frontier so that only patriots would be attacked by the Cherokee. These attacks took place only days after the final victory at Charleston. As the British fleet sailed north, General Charles Lee was still in command in the South. He received reports of the Indian attacks, but really didn't do much of anything. He was much more interested in what was going on up north and corresponding with folks up there. Some frontier settlements had fled to small forts. The Cherokee ended up laying siege to Fort Watauga, also known as Fort Caswell. That fort held out for several weeks, although the Cherokee did catch a teenage boy who had gone outside the fort walls, and they burned him alive. Similar sieges took place at McDowell Station in North Carolina and Lindley's Fort in South Carolina. In response, South Carolina organized a militia army led by General Griffith Rutherford. He led an army of 1,700 militia soldiers into Cherokee territory, and this army began its march into the territory on July 29, 1776. They attacked Cherokee villages, killing men, women, and children. They also burned villages and either stole or destroyed all the crops or feed stores that they could find. The hope was to starve out the Cherokee. Another force in Virginia, led by William Christian, engaged in a similar campaign up there. The fighting went on for months and, of course, brought out savagery on both sides. Provincial governments paid for Cherokee scalps. Soldiers on both sides made little distinction between combatants and civilians. Fighting was often hand-to-hand, and neither side had much interest in accepting a surrender. You won or you died, and death was usually preferable to either side than being captured. Both sides were happy to torture any captured prisoners. The Americans claimed they were doing so as payback for what the Cherokee were doing to American prisoners. By some estimates, the Patriots killed over 2,000 Cherokee out of a population of an estimated 13,000. Now, the Cherokee only had about 3,000 armed warriors, but many of those killed, of course, were civilians, including women and children. Patriots burned at least 52 Cherokee towns and innumerable smaller encampments. The Catawba Indians had allied themselves with the Patriots and assisted in attacks on the Cherokee. Only a small number of Creek Indians joined the fight, with most of the Creek opting for neutrality at this point. The Patriots had a scorched earth policy, burning all villages and food, which meant that even for the survivors among the Cherokee, they would go without food or shelter over the winter, leading to even more casualties. The campaign ended in 1777 with the Treaty of DeWitt's Corner that ceded even more land from the Cherokee to South Carolina and part of what became Georgia. The campaign prevented the Cherokee from acting as an effective fighting force for the remainder of the Revolutionary War. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. For more context on this story, please check out episode 102 of the American Revolution podcast, which you can get at blog.amrevpodcast.com. And please subscribe for free to the whole podcast on whatever platform you like. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.